Nine straight wins has never felt so good in the city of Winnipeg as the Jets continue to ride high.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode, obviously, we are chatting about some very fun stuff. Big win for the Jets over the weekend against St. Louis. Finally, Jets hockey is back. And what better way to start off than an OT thriller where the Jets maybe had a couple of issues, but rebounded after some rusty periods and managed to shake it off and pull off a big, nearly come from behind win. So we'll chat about that in just a brief second. But before we go any further, did want to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Now, like I said, the Jets came into St. Louis looking, for a bit of a statement. It's been a couple of weeks. We had the Four Nations tournament. A couple of Jet stars did not make it back in time to get some rest and play, so Hellebuyck and Morrissey both had the night off. But Kyle Connor was able to suit up and get in, after having been benched for the Canada-USA final. A little unfortunate for him. Very sad for Morrissey also, who was dealing with some very flu-like stuff and had to miss that game. But Hellebuyck at least did play. Hopefully Morrissey will be back tomorrow or today, so that he's feeling good enough for the game later. But the Jets, they had a little bit of a B team situation, not quite fully B team, but, the sort of squad that you would see if the Jets maybe had one or two major injuries. And I think early on, it didn't really show. The first period, Winnipeg was kind of gunning through St. Louis. They were really out shooting, and it wasn't for, just a single mistake on a bad pinch by Logan Stanley that ended up kind of setting up a really good opportunity for St. Louis. Otherwise, the Jets really didn't give the Blues a ton. In fact, Winnipeg's offense was generally very prolific. The second line finally scored a goal with a great feed from Perfetti Ehlers, and things kind of looked like they would start to snowball in Winnipeg's favor. The thing with the Blues, though, is if you don't bury them early, sometimes they can hang around long enough to be a problem. Yesterday, we saw that they actually beat Colorado 3-1, sitting on the second half of a back-to-back. The fact that they beat the Avs is pretty impressive. So this is not an easy team. Even when the Blues are bad, they're still frustrating. And that issue of kind of letting them hang around did end up biting the Jets. As the game started to wear on, Winnipeg definitely didn't have its cleanest outing. I think Arniel was probably losing a few hairs watching the turnovers and some of the passes. And I think one of the biggest problems is your blue line was really rough. Without Morrissey, this unit is just not the same. And they tried to make Stanley DeMello happen, which I don't know why you do that, but okay. You might as well, I guess. I think we all know that Stanley probably shouldn't be asked to play such a large role, but because he is in fact large, I guess they think that means he can play alongside DeMello. So yeah, that went about as well as expected. Heinola and Miller had a rougher outing too. Obviously, those guys have kind of been rotating in and out. Miller more often than Heinola. Heinola really hasn't played in months, so I sort of expected him to have a really rough game. I think it was just hard for him to really find his footing, and not really shocking when you're riding Pine for, again, basically 2 months. I don't quite know why he hasn't gotten more reps. I mean, like, even a game here or two just to rotate in a little bit probably wouldn't be the worst. It's not like Stanley has been doing enough to really earn that spot clearly. And in fact, I'd honestly rather see Hayden Fleury at this point. I know that Fleury and Pionk maybe aren't the best combo together, but we know that Fleury Miller can probably do the job. I don't know. The coaching staff definitely has like one or two blind spots, and I do slightly wonder if they think Stanley is a playoff defender. So, yeah, let's hope that that's not the case. Not that I think Heinola can do it either right now, but Yeah, this is probably where the front office wants to maybe make an acquisition. But thankfully, despite some bad defensive plays and stuff, a couple of really silly goals conceded. Comrie probably won't love the second one, but it is what it is. Eric, for his part, as the game wore on, really started to answer some really big chances. And, after St. Louis took a late lead on a power play thanks to a double minor for Pionk, whew, not Neil's best outing, I'll tell you. The Jets did pull the goalie, and they actually tied it on a great feed. Perfetti quietly getting another point on this one. Ehlers also having a hand in it. Velarde, he had a 2-goal night, and both opportunities net front. He made some great redirections and tips. There's really not many players in the league who have his hand-eye coordination and awareness in front of goal. The dude is an unbelievable apex predator. If you get him within like a foot of the crease, it's nuts. Never really seen a Jet who has that sort of net front hand-eye coordination. I thought Dubois was going to be that guy. He kind of was at times, but I actually think Velarde kind of smokes him out of the water in that one particular skill. Dubois may be a more complete player, but Velarde is honestly just a better pure poacher. So you give a little bit to get quite a bit. So a lot of fun. Very cool to watch him just continue to pound away. And he really is on track for a big season, 60-plus points easily. I am really hoping that the Jets can figure out a way to bring him back long-term. I'd kind of hoped that maybe we would see an announcement soon, because we did actually see another announcement, and it wasn't for Velarde, although the name does start with a V, so that's pretty funny. But yeah, for this game, I think the biggest thing was the Jets were pretty rusty. Eventually, they kind of had a bit of a minor meltdown, but thankfully, tied it, forced overtime. The overtime, that's where Comrie, I think, really did his best work. The Jets were just bad in overtime. It was really rough to watch. They had no gas. They made some really poor plays, a couple of really dumb reads. It happens. Comrie stood tall, got it to a shootout, and in the shootout, Comrie was absolutely perfect. So really couldn't be happier for him. There's not many players who are as insanely likable and just joyous to watch as Comrie is. And if you listen to his interviews, the dude is just a wonderful person, and I'm so happy for him. Love the dude. Glad he's back in a Jets uniform. He just seems to light up a room every time he's in front of the camera. So great for him. 3rd straight victory. 9th straight win for the Jets, which is the longest streak in franchise history. And win number 40 on the season. The Jets are the first team to reach that milestone this year. They are still 1 point shy of being in first thanks to the Caps, but otherwise, can you really complain? These two teams are fighting for a President's Trophy. I don't think anyone thought that would happen. Certainly not me. I'd be shocked if anyone had that prediction, but here we are. They are going to get a chance to meet in a couple of weeks, and yeah, what a year it has been. But, getting back from the break, going into a tough divisional road game against a team that sure may not be doing so hot recently, but is still a pain in the butt to deal with. A big road victory. You kind of cover for your own mistakes. Everyone sort of chips in somehow. Great road win, even if it wasn't, as they say at Picasso, you take it, though. It was one of those games where, yeah, you just need the result, even if you nearly shoot yourself in the foot. But Winnipeg managed to bandage it up and get it taken care of. So on to San Jose later this evening. Going to be a nice home game. I'm expecting some big stuff. We'll chat about what to look out for in that game later this episode. But I did mention that there was an extension. Obviously, Vlad Namestnikov is back for another 2 years at $3 million per. Want to chat about this extension because I think for the most part it's a good thing. But there are some interesting thoughts I've had about what it might mean for some other players. Is this a sign that the Jets are maybe trying to retain more of this group and keep it relatively veteran heavy? How will this play out with the kids? I want to chat about that in just a little bit. But before we go too much further, wanted to shout out our friends and partners at Wonderful Pistachios. Looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving contains 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. And they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats, helping you feel fuller for longer. Wonderful Pistachios comes in a couple of different varieties. You can get it shellless if you just want something that's super convenient, or if you're like me and you kind of like the tactile feel of cracking one open, it's just a fun little thing. You can get the shelled variety as well, and they are, again, super good for you. They come with great complete proteins that pack 9 essential amino acids. They're tasty. They come in easy little pouches to grab on the go. It literally could not be easier. And, for me who likes to go work out and stuff, having an extra protein punch really cannot hurt at all, especially in such a small, convenient package. So get snackin' and get crackin' with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. Hey friends, welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we are chatting about some interesting stuff for Winnipeg the past weekend. It was a big weekend of Jets action, some franchise records and stuff, and of course, an extension for Vladislav Namestnikov. Vladdy the Baddie is back. It's another 2 years. He has inked a $3 million per season contract, which, given the rising cap and stuff, is pretty fair. He's getting a small raise, but enough to be, meaningful for a guy in his early 30s who's getting up there and maybe not looking for a big contract, but has really found a home with the Jets. And I think this contract is a little interesting for a couple of reasons. The first is that it seems like the Jets have really tried to make a pitch to guys who are interested in staying around, players who they feel have really been loyal to the city, but it's not like they've been doing the Wheeler thing again. We haven't really seen them sign that sort of contract. I think the closest that maybe comes to the Wheeler deal is like Scheifele, but Scheifele is still producing pretty well right now. Maybe in his early 30s, things start to slow down for him, but for now, that's not really a concern. Wheeler, at the time that his deal was signed, was definitely on the way down, and you could kind of see it in the numbers, and really just watching him, it wasn't the same player. So Winnipeg, I think, has generally been careful about who they want to try and extend, and this contract is one of those depth deals where you're like, yeah, that seems fair enough. I don't really have any particularly strong feelings about it. I am a little sad that it probably means that Alex Iafallo is gone. I'd also assume that Mason Appleton probably doesn't come back. I think that you really should only be re-signing one of these players. Maybe the Jets feel differently and they try to bring all three back, but if you start doing that, I feel like you kind of run into the problem that a lot of teams do when they tie up a fair bit of money in your depth players. And with the Jets, they've got some guys pushing through the minors who I can honestly see taking on NHL roles next season. Braden Yeager might legitimately fight for a spot out of camp. I don't think he'll get it. I think he probably sits down in the minors for at least a season or so, unless he really hits the moose ground and just starts putting up absurd numbers. But, with him, he already has a very mature game. I think he's a little further along than some of the other prospects. And so I kind of wonder if that maybe changes his trajectory and the plan for him when he reaches camp next season. But that's a fair bit of ways away. I'm not really thinking about that right now, but it is kind of something to keep an eye on once camp invites and preseason start rolling around. He already looked really good this year, so I can't imagine that his stint with the Moose is going to be for tremendously long, unless the Jets try and do the old service time manipulation with the ZLC status. But I think that there's probably some level of incentive to see if he can become a more regular contributor for the Jets earlier into his career. As far as Appleton and Iafallo go, Iafallo would have been the one that I probably signed among all three. I thought Alex might be able to come back, but it probably suggests that he's looking for a little more than the Jets want to pay. All fair play to him. He deserves, his next nice little contract. He'll probably sign a 3-year, $4 million deal or something somewhere, which, the only problem I ever had with this contract was the $4 million price tag. I feel like at 3 or so, I'd be, pretty okay with it. 4 is starting to push it a little bit, and I'm sure that he could probably get that somewhere in free agency. So if he wants to find that with another team, more power to him. Again, I think the Jets probably should stay nimble with your contracts. Don't get into too many deals with term for players who are more in the bottom six and may kind of impede your ability to graduate some of your prospects, right? Brad Lambert probably could get into next year's team. Nikita Chubrikov, maybe if he's feeling well enough and is ready to go, we'll have to see how his rehab process goes. But I just think the Jets need to be careful and not tie up too much cash and term into players who, as much as we may like them and really enjoy them, are perhaps not, the needle movers, right? You need to make some savings somewhere so that you can swing big for some other rental or something. And, the Jets might be interested in doing something like that maybe over the summer. We'll have to see. I don't quite know how they're going to do all of this. They'll swing for a rental at this coming deadline, maybe somebody with term. If they really go big, maybe that's in the summer. I don't know. The Jets have so many different routes to a win here. And so I hope that they keep all of their options open. But for Namestnikov, I do wonder about what the rest of his career is like. At this point, by the time his contract ends, I would assume that he's probably thinking a little bit more about retirement. He's been around a long time. He's been, a winner pretty much everywhere he goes. Now it might be getting closer and closer to hanging it up once his time with Winnipeg ends. But I do think it is, regardless of whether you think he's a good player or not, a real nice testament to the fact that he wants to stay here. There aren't many players in the past for Winnipeg who have stuck around when they've come through on trades, but I think the Jets have really become a more attractive destination here recently. And with some of the player polls and stuff kind of deriding Winnipeg for being a place that, players don't want to come to or whatever, mostly because of their families. I think that that's probably a bigger thing. If your family and your spouse is telling you, I don't want to live there, you're probably going to have to do a little bit more to listen to them. So, I think players are probably comfortable doing almost anything, but there are some young 20s guys who don't want to stick around. Namestnikov has seemingly recognized what the Jets are building. It's nice that he, Niederreiter, Scheifele, and Hellebuck have stuck around. You've got other guys who have committed longer term. It's nice, right? And I feel like it's hopefully a sign of shifting tides for the Jets. You don't always want to build through free agency or stuff, but if you got some really good veterans or players who have been around for a while, who continue to be productive in some capacity, and I think that probably qualifies for what Namestnikov has been, it's nice that they want to stick around, take a relatively reasonable contract, and they want to contribute on a more routine basis. I think Namestnikov has started to turn his season around after a rougher start. Probably, in part thanks to injury. Maybe he's also slowing down a little bit. And sure, if he gets on the fourth line, maybe he's a little expensive for what you'll be asking of him. But, sometimes, and this is kind of the HR side of things, you got to do a little bit of HR positivity, right? Like I said earlier, sometimes to get, you have to give a little bit. And this might be one of those loyalty contracts that's still going to give you some pretty good value. Namestnikov, I think, in the meantime, has proven that he can at least start to keep up a little bit more with Ehlers and Perfetti. That line has generally been better as of late. And so, 2 years, $3 million per, that's pretty fine. Am I a little sad about Iafallo? Yes. I think Alex would have been nice to have back, but, the Jets are going to probably cut him loose after this year. They still need to leave at least 1 or 2 spots for the kids to graduate. And I think that this move shouldn't block too much. Unless there's a big surprise with how the Jets maybe overhaul their roster or something, I think that there will at least be 1 forward spot available for a young player to try and move into. Maybe 2 if there's, some significant changes, or if the Jets try to get a little bit younger next year. But I would imagine that they're still going to be, predominantly, or at least trying to be more veteran heavy. That's what they did this season. I think that they'll probably try and stay the course next year unless the playoffs go really, really badly. But, Vladdy the Baddie's back. He signed for a couple of seasons. Nice to have at least a little bit of cost certainty with him going forward. In terms of what I do wonder for like a second line center thing, I did see a comment on one of our earlier episodes asking whether the Jets need to go for a big right wing or something, or should they go for a 2C. If they're bringing back Namestnikov, it does kind of, to me, signal that they think the center market's not great, and so they may be looking more for a wide player, which, hey, I don't hate that. I think Lowry has proven that he has some more versatility. I still think that an upgrade down the middle long-term would be nice. Maybe the market's just not great for it. Maybe there's just not really a good-looking trade option. Namestnikov can at least do it relatively well enough to where during the regular season, it's probably not an issue. During the playoffs, maybe you start to question whether you want to run that option at 2C or even 3C. So, Winnipeg, I think that they understand, the center and defender market has not been looking great. But if they get Namestnikov at least signed for another year or 2, it gives them a stopgap option if nothing really comes forth. I will say that the center market, at least for rentals, is not great outside of like Nelson, but I do think that there's some guys with term that the Jets may be taking a look at. So let's not close that door just yet. And with teams like Nashville, St. Louis, and the like all looking to most likely sell here over the next couple of weeks, it might be a little premature to think that the Jets don't go for a 2 seed. A winger will be cheaper, which is nice, and I think that has some real attractive value for a Jets team that likes to usually bring in a couple of pieces and maybe wants to bring in one forward and one defender for the third pairing. So keep an eye out for that. But, the nice thing is the world is Winnipeg's oyster. They just have to go and get it. And I do think that they will this year. I feel like they understand the moment. I've said it, multiple times, that the way that Chevy has talked about this upcoming deadline for me feels a little more urgent than other years, but that's just my uneducated guess. We'll have to see how all of that plays out once his comments start turning into real action. But obviously, still got a couple of weeks before the deadline hits. The Jets, in the meantime, have some business to take care of. A chance at a 10th straight victory at home against the San Jose Sharks. Let's chat about what we might expect out of this game in just a brief second. But before we do, let's chat about our friends and partners at FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so that even if you miss tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in on the action at all times. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, be sure to use Same Game Parlay so you can combine your bets for an even bigger victory. I think it's a great option. For me, when I was watching the Chiefs versus I'm already blanking on the Super Bowl now, but Chiefs and Eagles, at any point during that game something could have changed. Maybe the Chiefs would wake up, and if you were using FanDuel at the time, you could even bet that maybe, just maybe, Mahomes throws a touchdown or two and you'd have a chance to cash out big time. You could possibly have won big, because if you did just a $5 bet like you can do right now, you can win $150 in bonus bets. This is for new FanDuel customers. It's a great offer, and if you want to join in and get in on the action for, say, an upcoming game like Winnipeg versus San Jose, be sure to visit FanDuel.com right now. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we are chatting about Winnipeg versus San Jose, a big game for the Jets because win number 10 on this streak is on the line. Any way that they can add another game to this already really impressive streak would be awesome. I don't know if it's just me, but it does sort of feel like the Jets are starting to peak at the right time. We've talked about this before in previous years where the second half of the season, the team sort of fell apart. This team has not been doing that. Yes, they do have some 5v5 issues and challenges. Yes, the blue line at times can be a little chaotic. All that said, this team, generally speaking, as a very cumulative whole, has been playing pretty good hockey. And it's earned them some real praise from around the league, from the front office, and it's certainly earning them a likely big trade deadline if Winnipeg plays its cards right. But that doesn't mean that they can rest on their laurels. This year's Sharks team, I think, has really been surprising in a lot of ways. San Jose is bad. They concede a lot, but they also score a lot. They're very fun. And it seems like they've kind of gotten to a point where they may lose a lot of games, but they're going to do so while still creating lots of offense, giving their young players a fair number of looks. And I think it's the kind of environment that's good for a rebuilding squad. You'll still continue to accumulate big draft picks. You're still kind of working through the development process, but you're not having the same negative vibes of a team like Nashville that's just really struggling to do much of anything. At least the Sharks are scoring, 100-plus goals every night, even if they're conceding like 150, right? San Jose's lineup, especially without Mikael Granlund, is looking a little bit worse for wear recently. They've got Eklund, Celebrini, and Toffoli up front. That line has been really good. And the second line of Zetterlund, Venberg, and Smith is also really underappreciated. Their top six is pretty decent. Like, if you look at that in isolation, you'd probably think that that's a reasonably good team in the Pacific. It's when you start getting into the depth units that you start to realize, oh, that's why they're kind of towards the bottom of the Pacific. Graf, Sturm, and Kunin are on the third line. Duer, Delandria, and Goudreau occupy the fourth. And the defense, well, yeah, that's where you have maybe some bigger questions. You've got Wallman and Thrun on the first pair, Ferraro and Liljegren on the second, and then Mohamedulin and Thompson on the third pairing. Mohamedulin, obviously a big young prospect. I think that San Jose is very excited about his future. But this blue line doesn't really have an elite number one guy. I don't know that Mohamedulin is ever going to be that kind of player. And I think for the Sharks, they're likely to move one of Wallman or Ferraro. Liljegren could be an option as well if somebody really, pays attention and looks at his body of work more from the Toronto days. This blue line is relatively mobile, but again, it lacks a lot of elite high-end skill. And when you've got like Georgiev and Vanacek in that, you're probably going to give up a fair few number of goals. But again, that's not really their concern, right? They want to make sure that they're creating a good environment for players like Thrun and Mohamedulin to develop properly. And I think that they've done a good job of still building a team that's going to be fun to watch and, score a fair few number of goals, even if they're still losing in a lot of these efforts. But I think for the Jets, Winnipeg will be coming back with their usual lineup. I would expect Morrissey, if he's ready to go, to come back in. Hopefully we see the pairings kind of reset to what they were before, other than it would be nice to give Hanel another game, but I'm pretty sure that they're going to bench him and just do Stanley and Miller together again. I really wish that they would at least give him more than like 1 or 2 games at a time. It's just frustrating because it feels like, I already know what Stanley is, and Stanley hasn't changed at all in years, not since he really first hit the pros. So maybe it wouldn't be the worst to figure out if Heinola can at least give you a little more, even if it's marginal. But I'm sure, we'll see Arniel usually do the same thing. As long as it's not, enough to sink the team, that's probably the biggest thing. But at some point, the Jets are going to have to figure out what to do with Stanley, because if he's in during the playoffs, I think that that's a lot more nervy moments, right? The way that they use him is a little bit bigger than your average third pairing D. They put him in high leverage situations like the PK and stuff. And oftentimes when somebody gets hurt in the game, you see his minutes go up. And I don't think that that's really how his prioritization should be. So, it is what it is. Maybe he gets tossed in a trade deadline deal here. I'm sure some team out there sees 6-7 and absolutely goes foaming at the mouth for the size and shot blocking ability, even if the rest of the game leaves a little bit more to be desired. But I'm not a front office person. I can't possibly tell you how the league is going to evaluate what Logan Stanley brings, but I do think somebody out there would be willing to bring him in, and maybe that helps the Jets get a big deal over the line. Even if we don't agree with the assessment of his talent, somebody else out there may. So keep an eye out for that. But Winnipeg versus San Jose, I'm suggesting a 5-2 win for the Jets. I think it'll be a fun game. I think the vibes are riding really high. I think the boys will come out and be a little bit cleaner than they were in the last game. Give me your score predictions below or at my social medias at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. For tonight's show, though, that's going to be all the time that we have. We'll see you back here tomorrow with coverage of Winnipeg versus San Jose. We'll have to keep an eye on any trade rumors, and hopefully we get some sort of an extension here with some of our big players like Sandberg and Velarde in the near future. But like I said, we'll chat about that later. As always, have a great night, and go Jets go.